6 weeks in the hospital after a triple bypass, and my daughter never came once. Not once. I was discharged on a Tuesday morning in late November with a plastic bag containing my clothes from the day of surgery, a list of medications I couldn't yet afford, and $43 in my wallet. The nurse who wheeled me to the front entrance smiled and said, "Someone picking you up today?" I told her yes. I was still believing it when she went back inside. I sat on the concrete bench outside the cardiac unit at St. Heed, Mercy Hospital in Chattanooga, and watched the automatic door slide open and shut for 2 hours and 20 minutes. I counted the families. A son in his 40s, helping his mother into a minivan, tucking a blanket around her knees. A husband sprinting across the parking lot with an umbrella because it had started to drizzle. 2 teenage granddaughters with a handmade sign, "Welcome home, Grandpa." I sat there with my plastic bag on my lap and my phone at 11% battery and watched all of it, like a man watching television through someone else's window. My daughter lives 22 minutes away. I know because I made that drive 100 times to babysit her kids, while she and her husband went to dinner, went to Nashville for the weekend, went wherever people go when they have someone reliable to leave the children with. I called her 3 times that morning, twice before they discharged me, once while I was sitting on that bench. The first 2 went to voicemail. The third she picked up. "Dad, I told you Brennan has a work thing and I've got the kids." "I know," I said. "I just thought maybe, can you get a lift?" I didn't have the app on my phone. I told her that. There was a pause that felt longer than it was. "I'll Venmo you $30. Just get home safe, okay? I'll call you tonight." She didn't call that night. I sat there a while longer after that. The drizzle turned into actual rain, light but steady, the kind that soaks you slow without you noticing. A security guard came out at some point and asked if I needed assistance. I told him I was fine. He didn't look convinced, but he went back inside anyway. That's when the man sat down next to me. He was maybe 50, heavy-set in a good way, the kind of man who looks like he built something with his hands once and never forgot how. He had on a canvas jacket and work boots, and he was carrying a paper cup of coffee from the vending machine in the lobby. He set it down on the bench between us without saying anything. Then he looked at me the way people look at you when they've already decided they're going to say something, but they're working up to it. "You just get discharged?" he asked. "This morning," I said, "waiting on a ride." I didn't answer right away. There's a particular kind of shame that comes from being old and alone in the rain outside a hospital. It doesn't announce itself. It just settles. "Seems like," I said. He nodded, like that was a complete answer. We sat there for a minute, just the 2 of us, and the sound of rain on the awning. "You don't remember me," he said. It wasn't a question. I looked at him then. Square jaw, dark eyes, a scar above his left eyebrow that had faded with time. Something moved in the back of my memory, like something shifting under still water. "I'm not sure," I said. 14 years ago," he said. "You were teaching shop class at Westridge Vocational, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I was in your class for about a semester before I had to drop out, and then I had him. Not the face exactly, but the situation. A kid who'd been sleeping in his truck in the school parking lot because his stepfather had put him out. I found out by accident. He'd left a blanket in the back seat, and I'd seen it through the window one afternoon when I was loading supplies. I'd never made a big thing of it. I'd just let him use the shop bathroom to clean up in the mornings, slipped him $20 a few times when I had it, and when he told me he'd gotten into a trade certification program in Knoxville but couldn't cover the enrollment fee, I'd written him a check for $350 out of my personal account. "Cody," I said. He smiled. "Yes, sir." I shook my head slowly. "You look good." "I do all right." He picked up the coffee cup, turned it in his hands. "I own a plumbing company now. 12 employees. We do commercial contracts mostly. Schools, office buildings." He paused. "I've thought about finding you for a long time, wasn't sure how." "I didn't do much," I said. "You did enough." He looked at me sideways. "Your daughter coming?" Something in his voice told me he already suspected. "I don't think so," I said. He nodded slowly. He finished the coffee and set the empty cup down. Then he stood up and said, "Come on, My truck's right there. I'll take you home." I started to object. Pride is a foolish thing, especially in the rain at 67 years old, with $43 and a heart that had just been rebuilt from the inside out. But I let it go. I picked up my bag and I followed him. His truck was a grey F-250, clean and solid smelling, like sawdust and machine oil. He turned the heat on before he even asked me for the address. When I gave it to him, my house out off Route 41, the one I'd lived in for 31 years, the one I'd raised my daughter in after her mother left, he just typed it into his phone and pulled out of the lot without any fuss. We talked some on the way. I told him about the surgery, the 6 weeks, the recovery. He told me about the plumbing company, his wife, his 2 boys who were 7 and 10. He said the older one had already shown an interest in how things worked, liked taking apart his toys to see the insides. "That's how it starts," I said. "That's what you used to say in class," he said. "You said the best craftsmen were the ones who couldn't leave something alone until they understood it." I didn't remember saying that, but it sounded like something I'd believed. When we turned onto my road, I saw it before he slowed down. The front porch light was off, not just off. The bulb had been out for months, and no one had replaced it. The grass along the driveway had grown up past the mailbox. My mail was overflowing, envelopes bent and damp. 2 weeks of newspapers in plastic sleeves decomposing on the front walk. I didn't say anything. Neither did he, but I saw him look. The door unlocked fine, which was something, but inside, the house was cold and still in a way that told you immediately no one had been in it for a while. Not the cold of a thermostat turned down to save money. The cold of absence. I hit the kitchen light. Nothing. I tried the living room. Nothing. "Power's off," Cody said quietly behind me. He pulled out his phone and used the flashlight. We walked through the kitchen, where the smell told me the refrigerator had been off long enough for everything inside to go bad. I opened it and shut it again fast. On the kitchen counter there was a pile of unopened mail and 2 envelopes that had been opened and left face down. I picked them up. One was a disconnect notice from the power company dated 5 weeks ago. The other was something that made me set it back down on the counter without finishing it. It was a letter from a property management company, addressed to me, but the first line read, "Per your authorized representative's request, dated October 14th, please find enclosed the preliminary rental assessment for the above-referenced property." I had never spoken to a property management company in my life. "Cody," I said. He came over and I showed him the letter without speaking. He read it twice. When he looked up, something had changed in his expression. "Who's your authorized representative?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. But even as I said it, I did know. There was only one person who could have done this. Cody stayed that night. He insisted on it, and I was too tired to argue and too grateful to pretend I didn't need it. He called the power company from my kitchen, while I sat at the table and tried to process what I was looking at. He got them to reconnect service by 6 o'clock that evening, paid the reconnection fee with his own card. When I said something about it, he held up one hand and said, "Don't." We spent the next morning going through the mail together. There was more. A second letter from the same property management company, more detailed this time. An inquiry from a title company I didn't recognize, requesting documentation related to the property for a pending transaction. And buried near the bottom of the pile, something that made the room tilt slightly beneath my feet. A letter from a bank I didn't do business with, referencing a home equity line of credit opened in my name in October, with an available balance of $180,000, of which $112,000 had already been drawn. I read that last number 3 times. "I didn't open a line of credit," I said. Cody was quiet for a moment. "Is there anyone who could have signed for you?" "With legal authority." And that's when I remembered the form. It had been the 3rd day after surgery. I was still in the ICU, still coming in and out from the anesthesia and whatever else they had me on. My daughter had been there, one of the 2 times she visited in 6 weeks, I'd come to learn. She'd had a clipboard. She'd said something about paperwork, about how they needed someone to be able to manage my affairs while I was recovering, how it was just temporary, just practical, how she'd handle the bills so I didn't have to worry. I'd signed something. I remembered the pen feeling wrong in my hand, my signature coming out like a stranger's. A power of attorney, I told Cody. He looked at me steadily. Do you know what you signed exactly? She said it was to pay my bills. He was quiet for a long moment. I think you need a lawyer, he said. Not later, today. He made a call. A woman named Adrian Foss, an elder law attorney he'd used when his own grandmother had run into trouble with a facility that had been mismanaging her trust. She agreed to meet us that afternoon. Adrian was in her early 50s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. The kind of person who has heard every version of every story and is still paying attention. She reviewed the power of attorney document I'd signed. Cody had found the original in a folder my daughter had left in the kitchen drawer, which I thought was strange until Adrian pointed out that leaving it somewhere visible was probably deliberate, meant to make it look routine. This is a durable power of attorney, Adrian said. It gives your daughter broad authority over your finances, your property, your medical decisions, and it doesn't expire. She told me it was temporary. What you were told and what you signed are two different things. She set it down on her desk. The good news is, a document signed under sedation in an ICU without independent legal counsel. That's challengeable. The bad news is, we have to prove your mental state at the time of signing. I was on a morphine drip, I said. I barely knew what day it was. Your medical records will support that, she said. We'll subpoena them. She also told me to check my prescription records. I'd been on blood pressure medication for 4 years. A daily pill I'd picked up at the Walgreens on Shallerford Road every 30 days like clockwork. My daughter had offered to start picking it up for me in August, 3 months before my heart attack. She said she drove past it anyway on the way to the gym. I'd thought it was thoughtful. When Adrian had the pills tested, it took 3 days to get the result back. She called me on a Thursday morning while I was sitting at my kitchen table with Cody, who had started coming by every day now. Not because I asked him to, but because he seemed to understand that I shouldn't be alone while this was unfolding. The pills in your prescription bottle, Adrian said. They're not your medication. I heard the words, but my brain moved around them slowly, the way it does when something is too large to fit through the front door of your understanding all at once. What are they? Basically inert supplements. B vitamins, compressed filler, no active ingredient. I sat very still. Someone with untreated high blood pressure, Adrian continued, her voice careful, taking placebo pills for 3 months. The risk of cardiac event increases significantly. You understand what I'm telling you? I understood. Cody was watching me from across the table. I didn't say anything. I just set the phone down and looked at my hands, which were shaking slightly in a way they hadn't before the surgery. A small tremor. The doctor said might or might not resolve. My daughter had been picking up my medication since August. I'd had my heart attack in November. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, Cody brought me a glass of water and set it in front of me, and didn't say anything, which was the right thing to do. That evening, my daughter called me for the first time since I'd been home. I heard you're back, she said. She sounded cautious. Not concerned, cautious. I've been back a week, I said. I was going to come by, but Brennan. I know, I said. He's busy. There was a pause. Dad, are you okay? You sound... I found the letter from the property management company, I said, and the bank statement for the HELOC. Silence. Dad, I can explain. I also had my medication tested. The silence this time was a different kind. Longer. Heavier. I don't know what you think, she said finally. Her voice shifted now, harder at the edges. But everything I did was to help you. You were in the hospital. Someone had to manage things. $112,000, I said. You managed $112,000 out of my home equity in 6 weeks. That money went to... I'll hear it from the attorney, I said. And I hung up. She didn't call back. What she did instead, 2 days later, was file for emergency guardianship. The petition arrived by process server on a Friday afternoon. Adrian called me before I'd even finished reading it. She'd been expecting something like this. It's a common counter-move, she said. If they can get a judge to declare you incapacitated, They can shut down the investigation before it starts. They'd control your legal decisions, your finances, everything. They're saying I'm not competent. They've attached a letter from a psychiatrist. Says you show signs of cognitive decline following cardiac surgery, the job being unduly influenced by a party who has a financial interest in your estate. I thought about Cody, who had paid my reconnection fee out of his own pocket and hadn't asked for a receipt. Who's the psychiatrist? I asked. A Dr. Renford Blaine, works out of an office in Brentwood. I'd never heard of him. Adrian subpoenaed his appointment records. There was no record of him ever examining me. When she dug further, she found a photo on her son-in-law Brennan's company LinkedIn page from a charity golf tournament the previous spring. Standing next to Brennan, arm around his shoulder, smiling into the camera, Dr. Renford Blaine. They'd found a friend to write a fake evaluation. Meanwhile, my daughter had started posting on social media. I didn't follow her online, and for years we'd had a falling out about it. But Cody showed me one evening on his phone. The posts were careful. Worried daughter language. So hard watching a parent struggle after a health crisis. Praying for clarity and peace. A photo of herself at what she called family dinner. Her and Brennan and their kids, with the caption, "Holding it together for the people who need us most." She had never mentioned me by name. She didn't have to. The guardianship hearing was set for December 19th. Adrian brought in a geriatric neurologist named Dr. Osi to evaluate me. A real evaluation, 2 hours at his office, tests I hadn't taken since school, word lists, shapes, math problems, questions about current events. I scored in the 92nd percentile for my age group. Dr. Osi said in his report that I showed no signs of cognitive impairment, that my reasoning was intact, and that he saw nothing to suggest I was susceptible to undue influence. The week before the hearing, I found the box. It was in the hall closet, behind the coats, in a spot my wife had used for years to store documents she considered important. She had died of pancreatic cancer 11 years ago, quickly, 3 months from diagnosis to the end, and I had never fully gone through her things. There were boxes I simply hadn't been ready to open. I was looking for my original deed to the house when I found it. A shoebox with a rubber band around it. Inside were her papers, insurance documents, the kids' old report cards, a handful of birthday cards she'd saved, and at the bottom, in an envelope with my name on it in her handwriting, a letter. I sat down on the closet floor and read it there. My wife's handwriting was careful, and even the handwriting of a woman who had been a third-grade teacher for 22 years. The letter was dated 2 months before she died. "My love," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this face to face. I'm sorry about a lot of things, but this most of all." She had found something 3 years before her death. A bank statement my daughter had apparently intercepted and then accidentally left in her car. It showed a series of transfers, small amounts at first, then larger ones, from an account in my name that my daughter had been listed on as a co-signatory since college. A total of $28,000 over 14 months. My wife had confronted her. My daughter had cried. She'd said it was a mistake, a loan she'd meant to repay, that Brennan had a business debt, and she'd panicked, and she was so sorry she would pay every penny back. My wife had believed her. "I thought I was protecting you," she wrote. "I thought I was protecting the family. I told her this was her one chance. I never told you because I was afraid of what it would do to you, what it would do to all of us. I have asked myself 1,000 times if I was right, and I don't know. I think I was wrong. I think I let her believe there were no real consequences. I think I taught her that if she cried hard enough and promised sincerely enough, the problem would go away. If she ever does something like this again, and God, I hope she doesn't, please don't make my mistake. Please don't protect her from what she's done. I loved her too much to let her face the truth, and I think I did her harm. Don't do her the same harm. Hold her accountable. That's what love is supposed to look like. I'm so sorry. I love you more than anything I've ever known." I sat on the closet floor for a long time, long enough for the afternoon light to change. When I came out, Cody was in the kitchen making coffee. he hadn't asked my permission to make, which was one of the things about him I'd come to appreciate. He took one look at my face and didn't say anything. I sat down at the table and put the letter in front of him. "Read it," I said. He read it carefully all the way through, then set it down. "She knew," he said. "She knew." He looked at the table for a moment. "What do you want to do with it?" I thought about my wife, about the way she'd looked at our daughter at family dinners in those last years, proud, but with something underneath it, some small shadow I'd never been able to name. I understood it now. "I want to use it at the hearing," I said. The hearing was in Judge Lorena Taft's courtroom, a compact room on the 4th floor of the Hamilton County Courthouse. My daughter and Brennan sat on one side with their attorney, a man named Whitaker, who was polished and confident and had the particular energy of someone who charges $400 an hour and knows it. Adrian and I sat on the other side. Cody sat in the gallery behind me. Whitaker opened with what Adrian had predicted, the story of a worried daughter trying to protect a vulnerable father from a man who'd inserted himself into the situation for financial gain. He referenced Cody's plumbing company, pointed out that I had no will on file at the county, suggested that a man of means who befriended a 67-year-old widower recovering from open-heart surgery was worth examining closely. Cody didn't react. I didn't either. When it was Adrian's turn, she walked through the evidence methodically. The power of attorney signed in the ICU with documented sedation. The home equity line of credit opened without my knowledge. The property management inquiry. The pharmacy record showing my daughter had picked up my blood pressure prescription 3 months running. The lab analysis of the pills. She called Dr. Osei, who testified about my evaluation scores and cognitive health in plain, specific language that left very little room for interpretation. Then she called Dr. Renford Blaine, who had apparently not expected to be subpoenaed. He took the stand, looking like a man who had made a calculation that hadn't held. Adrian showed the golf tournament photo. She showed his appointment records, no record of any examination of me. She asked him, calmly and directly, whether he had ever examined William Hargrove. He said he had reviewed records. She asked whether a diagnosis of cognitive decline could be made ethically on the basis of a records review alone, without any direct clinical examination. He said it was a matter of clinical judgment. She said the Board of Medical Examiners could make that determination, and she would be filing a complaint that afternoon. His testimony was stricken. Then Whitaker called Cody to the stand and went after him the way Adrian had expected. The debt question, the financial interest angle, whether Cody stood to benefit from my estate. Cody answered calmly and honestly. When Whitaker asked whether he had ever thought about what would happen to my property when I died, Cody looked at him for a moment and said, "I think about making sure he stays alive long enough to worry about that himself." There was a moment in the gallery. Judge Taft called a recess. In the hallway, Adrian squeezed my arm and said we were ahead. I nodded. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and touched the envelope. When we came back in, before Whitaker could continue, I asked to address the court. Adrian had prepared me for this. She'd told me it was unusual but not improper, and that Judge Taft had a reputation for allowing principals to speak in elder proceedings if they requested it. The judge looked at me for a moment over the top of her reading glasses. Then she said, "Go ahead, Mr. Hargrove." I stood up. My hands were steadier than I expected. "Your Honor, I'm not going to talk about the legal evidence. Adrian has covered that. I want to say one thing about the question of whether I am capable of making my own decisions." I paused. My daughter's attorney has suggested that my friendship with Cody Mabry is suspicious, that the speed with which he came into my life should raise questions. I'd like to address that. I looked at my daughter. She was looking at the table. 14 years ago, I said, I was teaching shop class at Westridge Vocational, and I found out one of my students was living in his truck because he had nowhere to go. I didn't make a big thing of it. I let him use the bathroom in the shop. I gave him some cash when I had it. When he got into a certification program, I wrote him a check for $350 so he could cover the enrollment fee. I never told anyone. I never expected anything from it. He was a kid who needed a hand, and I had one to give. I held up the envelope. I also found a letter last week, I said, written by my wife before she died. I am going to read part of it. Whitaker started to object. Judge Taft held up one hand without looking at him. I read the relevant sections. My wife's words about the $28,000. Her words about wanting to protect the family. Her final words, hold her accountable. That's what love is supposed to look like. The room was very quiet. My daughter was not looking at the table anymore. She was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face since she was a child. Not guilt exactly, but something behind guilt. Something that looked like recognition. I set the letter down. I'm not senile, I said to Judge Taft. I'm a 67-year-old man who had a heart attack, and now I understand why. My daughter's attorney wants to talk about Cody Mabry's motivations. I'd like to suggest the court consider her clients. Judge Taft let the room settle for several seconds. Then she said, I've heard enough. She denied the guardianship petition in full. She referred Dr. Blaine's conduct to the medical board. She ordered an immediate freeze on the home equity line of credit pending investigation and mandated that my daughter return full legal control of my finances within 48 hours or face contempt proceedings. She looked at my daughter directly and said, I sincerely hope the district attorney's office sees the complete picture here. They did. It took 7 weeks, but they did. My daughter was charged with financial elder abuse, fraud, and reckless endangerment. Brennan was charged as a co-conspirator. The fake psychiatrist lost his license to practice medicine in the state of Tennessee. The DA's office determined that the medication substitution, combined with the timeline of my heart attack, met the threshold for criminal reckless endangerment. They were both looking at felony charges. In the end, my daughter pleaded guilty to financial elder abuse and fraud. Her attorney had managed to get the reckless endangerment charge reduced. As part of the plea, she was sentenced to 30 months probation, full financial restitution, $122,000, including attorney's fees, community service, and mandatory counseling. Brennan received a similar sentence. On the day of the sentencing, she looked at me across the courtroom, and I looked back at her. She was thinner than she'd been before all this. The polished confidence she'd always carried was gone. What was underneath it looked, for the first time in a long time, like something real. She didn't say anything to me. I didn't say anything to her. There was nothing to say that wasn't already in my wife's letter. That was 8 months ago. The money has been coming back in installments as ordered by the court. I don't need it as much as I need the knowing that it's coming. The sense that the machinery of consequence is actually working the way it's supposed to. That's something I wasn't sure I believed in for a while. Cody's company did the plumbing work when I renovated the back of the house in March. He wouldn't take the full rate. We compromised on a number that I thought was too low and he thought was too high, which seemed right. His boys came out one Saturday while the crew was working, and his older one, the one who likes to take things apart, spent an hour watching the pipework and asking questions. When I offered to show him how the shut-off valve worked, he lit up the way kids do when someone treats their curiosity seriously. Looked like something I'd seen before. My daughter called me in September. Not about the restitution payments, just called. I let it ring twice before I answered. We talked for 11 minutes. We didn't talk about any of it. She asked how I was feeling, how the heart had been. I asked about the kids. She said they were good, growing fast. I said, that's how it goes. There was a silence at the end that lasted long enough to mean something, though I couldn't have said exactly what. Dad, she said. I know, I said. I don't know what comes next between us. I'm not in a hurry to decide. There are things you can rebuild, and things that have to find their own new shape, and it's not always clear which is which until you're in the middle of the work. What I do know is this. My wife was a good woman who loved her daughter so much she carried a secret to her grave to protect her. It didn't protect her. It gave her 11 more years to practice. I made a different choice, and I'm going to have to live with what that costs, the same way she lived with what her choice cost. But I sleep better than I have in years. My blood pressure is managed by the right medication now, And every Tuesday afternoon I go out to the back of the house, where I've set up a small workshop. Nothing fancy, just a workbench, some hand tools, a few projects I've been meaning to get to, and I spend a couple of hours working on something with my hands, the way I used to. Last week I started on a bookcase for Cody's boys. I measured twice before I cut a single piece.